Hey everybody! Today I'm going to be doing a presentation on some of the most popular Zen Buddhist art forms. Obviously there are more than what I'm going to cover today, but these are just some of the biggest ones. You'll see that a lot of these they mainly are practiced in Japan. Uh, Obviously, these are practiced outside of Japan as well, but the Japanese are the most well known for practicing these. And what I'm going to do is kind of give you a short rundown of how they're practiced and a short history too of how they originated and kind of how they're practiced today as well. So yeah, let's get started. Here's my title slide. Zen Art Forms by Seth Hammonds, by the way. That's my name. The first is Shodo, and that basically translates as Japanese calligraphy. Um, yes. So I'll show you a picture of it so you kind of know what I'm talking about while I'm giving the history. So yeah, there you go. You can see the brush, the ink. This is a little thing where they hold their ink and a couple other instruments. So Shodo originated in China, and it developed all its basic forms by the end of the Han Dynasty in 2020 AD. It was then introduced in Japan during the 6th century AD. In Japan, the Chinese characters were gradually modified for the Japanese language, obviously, and came to be known as kanji, non-phonetic symbols used to represent entire words. In addition, the Japanese developed two phonetic alphabets, known as hiragana and katakana, which are similar to the Latin alphabet used in Western countries in, in that their individual characters are used to represent sounds rather than entire words. Each line is meaningful. Each movement of the calligrapher's brush creates something fine. East inhabitants trust that the hieroglyph has also a sacred value because the letter in the East is considered as the epistles of heaven. That's why the calligraphy sign bears the power charge in it. Considering calligraphical work, think about success, light, loved, pleasure, creativity, about everything that makes you happy and the happiness that fills your life. So those are just kind of some of the things I'll think about when they're doing the calligraphy. Traditional ways of calligraphical symbols transfers are laconic. They are written on white paper, which personifies emptiness in Zen philosophy, and the black symbols on a white background blends the concepts of yin and yang as female and man's origins. So it's kind of yin and yang in the female and male sense. And as a student progresses, because obviously you don't just learn this overnight, it takes a lot of practice. And as a student progresses in the practice of Shodo, he or she is said to pass through 4 stages. The first is Iten Shuchu, 1 point collected in the center or perfect concentration. The next is Ichiji Kaizoku, which is 1 action continued or sticking to one thing. The next is Kansho Shimbi, which means appreciation of beauty. And the last and the fourth is Ningin Kaese, formation of human character. So that would be the ultimate goal, is that you're kind of helping your character as a human. And here's just another. So that's really the main form of Shodo. It's generally like the characters, different Japanese characters or Chinese characters, but there's also kind of like a subform of Shodo, and that's called Inso. You might have seen this before. It's pretty popular in the Zen tradition. Um, so yeah, it's technically a form of Shodo, but slightly different. Uh, so they use the ink and the white paper as well, but it's specifically they're drawing the circle, or a circle-like character. With Inso, it symbolizes many more things, including strength, elegance, the universe, single-mindedness, the state of mind of the artist at the moment of creation, and the acceptance of imperfection as perfect. It also represents the oneness of life and all things contained within it, the spirit of harmonious cooperation, personal development, and refinement of character, the visible and invisible, absolute fullness and emptiness, simplicity, completeness, endlessness, perfect harmony, the circle of infinity, and the cyclical nature of existence. It is a manifestation of the moment, an expression of absolute enlightenment, a visual manifestation of the Heart Sutra, and a representation of our true and innermost self. The Inso is a universal symbol of wholeness and completion. Form is void, and void is form. When viewing Inso, one can see that the form and void are interdependent, and in fact define each other. This is something that will kind of pop up in the art forms later as well, specifically the Zen gardens that I get to later. But yeah, so when viewing Inso, one can see that the form and void are interdependent and in fact define each other. There are so many definitions available that each of us is truly left with the responsibility to select or create our own definition of Inso. So it's also very open to interpretation. Creation of an Inso symbolizes a moment in time in the life of the artist when the mind is free to simply let the spirit create through the physical body. Inso is a fascinating expression of individuality as expressed by variations in ink tones, brushstroke thickness, shape of the circle, and even the positioning of a single point where the circle begins and ends. An Inso might seem simple to draw, but only a few painters are known for their excellent Inso, which are said to represent their mastery of Zen. It is believed that in the hands of the Zen master, the power of Inso symbol is released, helping those who meditate upon it reach a higher level of consciousness. As a symbol of enlightenment, Zen masters often brush paint an Inso for their student to meditate upon. The quality of the brushwork is said to reveal the depth of the master's enlightenment. The brushed ink of the circle is usually done on silk or rice paper in only one movement, thereby eliminating the possibility of modification. So it's done in one quick stroke and there's no changing it once it's done. The single brush stroke may be large, painted with a broad, vigorous stroke, or it may be narrow and refined. So there are some variations on it. They don't all look like this. The Inso reveals the expressive moment and character of the artist's spirit and leaves the creator fully exposed at one particular moment in time. Zen Buddhists believe that only a person who is mentally and spiritually complete can draw a true Inso. Some artists paint Inso with an opening in the circle, while others complete the circle. An open Inso may express the idea that the Inso is not separate from all that it is rather it is a part of something greater. The open circle reflects that the Inso is not contained within itself, but open out to infinity. It might also speak to the imperfection as an essential and inherent aspect of our existence. Obviously, you can tell it's not like a perfect circle. There's some breaks. You can kind of see how the brush was there. You could see that it was painted by like a not perfect brush, and there's no really aim for perfection. Inso can open the circle of emptiness in which the self flows in and out while remaining centered, or it can be closed and express a mandala or a cosmogram. Leaving the Inso open is like leaving room for the spirit to flow in and out of the circle of emptiness, allowing it to breathe. Breath and emptiness are essential ingredients for meditation, contemplation, and the creation of a spiritual life. This is a Zen symbol of the absolute, the true nature of existence, the duality within life, and the imperfection of all things. It is a symbol that combines the visible and the hidden, the simple and the profound, the empty and the full. The very imperfections and contours of the Inso which must be painted by human hand rather than constructed as a mathematically correct circle, make the Enso a manifestation of perfection. It is perfect just as it is, even in all its imperfection. Enso suggests that to the student to stop striving for the perfection and allow the universe to be as it is. Abandon the idea that there is a one-size-fits-all path that ends at some specific point, place, or time. When you believe that you have arrived at some final destination on your path, Enso reminds you to start again exactly at the point where you are now and to embrace and enjoy your unique experiences on life's journey. So it has some very profound meaning for the Zen Buddhists. It's not just kind of just painting, maybe, as some people in the West would, consider you're just doing a painting. It has very deep spiritual meaning for them. So yeah, here's one more Enso. Again, you can see the imperfection. This one doesn't actually connect like the last one did. So that's something that's interesting. And yeah, again, you see the brush strokes. So yeah, moving on to the next art form, which is Chado, or the tea ceremony. This is very famous in Japan. So tea has long been valued by Chan monks in China to keep them awake during meditation. According to legend, when the Bodhidharma, the founder of Zen, struggled to stay awake during meditation, he ripped his eyelids off, and tea plants sprang from the discarded eyelids. So it's pretty kind of a gruesome story, but that's how the legend goes about tea in China and why they started initially doing it. What we now call the tea ceremony was created by a former Zen monk who became an advisor to the shogun, and he served tea in a small plain room in his master's sumptuous villa. He replaced ornately decorated porcelain with earthen bowls. There are several variables in the traditional tea ceremony, but commonly the guests will wash their mouths and hands and remove their shoes before entering the room for the ceremony. Food may be served first. The host lights a charcoal fire to heat water in a kettle and cleans the tea tools. Then the host mixes the powdered tea and water with a bamboo whisk. These movements are all ritualized, and to fully enter the ceremony, the guests should be paying attention. So yeah, just to give you kind of what I was just talking about, the whisk there, and there's the bowls, and the stir, and a couple other instruments. So yeah, this is just kind of a basic set. I think some are more complicated, but yeah, this is the more basic one. After the tea is made, the guests will sip from a single bowl, which is passed among them according to ritual. When to bow, when to speak, how to handle the bowl, all follow precise forms. When participants are fully engaged, the ritual evokes great peace and great clarity, a non-dualistic consciousness, and a deep intimacy with oneself and others present. So we're seeing some themes here. A lot like Enso. That's kind of the goal of Enso, is, to get yourself to a very present state. But yeah, here's a Japanese woman about to perform the Chado ceremony, and I don't know what year this is from, but it seems like it's old. The guiding philosophy of Chado, just to add a little more to the philosophy, rest on harmony, respect, purity, and serenity. A unique meat for never is another philosophy of Japanese Chado, which means that each cup of tea is unique. There will never be any cup of tea just like the one you are drinking, because of the differences in teas, the drinking atmosphere, and the people in one's life. Thus, one should try to make a good tea and treat guests well each and every time. Guests should recognize the preciousness of each meeting and attend it with the knowledge that it will never be repeated. Applying the philosophy of a unique meat for never to daily life encourages living in the present. The third philosophy of Japanese Chado is sitting alone and observing the thought. After the guests leave, the host sits down, observing the teapot and thinking about the tea meeting that will never be repeated. This is the feeling of without. Thus, Chado has been strongly influenced by Zen Buddhism and is a core philosophy in Zen. Alright, and moving on to the next art form, we have Zen Gardens. This is also one of the most popular. I'm sure you've heard of the Zen garden before. You know, usually we think of the sand and rocks. You know, you can even buy them at like bookstores, a small one and stuff. Um, you know, normally you're something like this, but there are actually some other different kinds, and I'll get into one of the other different kinds of Zen garden as well. But yeah, first I'm going to give you a little overview of the kind of the history of Zen gardens. As a practice, the Zen garden emerged in the 8th century CE, apparently in imitation of the Chinese gardens of the Song dynasty. The arrangement of rocks symbolized a mythical view of Mount Pinglai, home of the legendary 8 immortals. In the Zen tradition, gardens evolved toward a more earthly purpose, to remind practitioners that life can be elemental, simple. Some of the first Zen gardens were called Zazen Seikei, meditation rocks, because in their simplicity, the very reason for being was to radiate silence, calm, and tranquility to anyone contemplating them. In the same vein, by the 15th century CE, a variant of Zen gardens moved toward total abstraction, though without entirely losing a link with materiality. Water and vegetation decreased and even disappeared in some cases, and there was only a delineated area and some grouping of rocks, like so. A feature preserved over the centuries, though, was that the garden was to be observed from a fixed position within the monastery. This was also to encourage a sudden recognition or rediscovery of the elemental sense of existence. So you would look at it from a specific point of view. You weren't just going to walk around and observe it. You would specifically get down and look at it. So yeah, that's how the Zen gardens, that's their meaning and stuff. And so now, let me go back. I'm going to kind of go over some of my favorite Zen gardens. These are all in Japan, mainly in the city of Kyoto. Kyoto has a great history of Zen gardens, and some of my favorites are there. So yeah, Nanzenji Rock Garden. It is a Zen. It's a Zen Buddhist temple in Kyoto. It began as a detached palace in 1264, but was repeatedly destroyed by fire, and most of the old garden was lost. A new Zen garden called the Leaping Tiger Garden was made after 1611, and it is a good example of the dry garden style. It has a large sand rectangle enclosed by buildings on 2 sides and a sloping bank on the other side. The bank has rock compositions at its foot, which can be seen as tiger cubs, or as a turtle, and a crane. These are animals associated with the Isle of the Immortals. Nanzenji is now the headquarters of the Nanzenji branch of Rinzai Zen. Okay, and one of my other favorite gardens is the Ryoan-ji. It is possibly the most famous rock garden in Japan. It was built on the grounds of a villa at the Fujiwara clan of the Heian period. The deputy of Shogun and warlord Katsumoto bought the estate in 1450 and built his residence on it, together with the temple Ryoan-ji. It was destroyed in the Onin War but rebuilt in 1488 by Katsumoto's son Matsumoto. It is probable that the garden of the temple was also created at that time, but some scholars argue that it was built earlier by Katsumoto, or later, for example, by Zen monk and gardener Sayome, who also built the dry landscape garden of Daisen Inn. The temple burnt down in 1796 and the garden was recreated later. As a print of the year 1799 shows, the garden today hasn't changed since that time. Apart from little patches of moss around the stones, you can see that this garden has no plants. Behind the mud wall, a row of trees creates a green backdrop for the garden, making the light gray sand seem brighter. This design is more complex than it seems at first. For example, it is impossible to view all 15 stones at once from any angle of the terrace. The composition is also a fine example for the delicate balance of mass and void and the skillful use of numbers and groups. So obviously the rocks would represent mass and the sand is representing void and kind of gives that balance. So here's my last favorite garden. This one is a lot different. And then the other two, you can tell, there's this giant cone of sand. The Shogun Stroll Garden at Ginkaju Temple It's one of the best traditional landscape gardens in Japan. The garden was reportedly designed by the great landscape artist Sayomi and features various styles, including a dry sand garden and moss garden. The dry sand garden, known as the Sea of Silver Sand, is that's the name of this specific garden. It's the Sea of Silver Sand. It's particularly famous and features a massive cone of sand, which is said to symbolize the iconic Mount Fuji. The beautiful moss garden features ponds with islands and bridges, little streams, and a wide variety of plants. The garden is enjoyed by walking or strolling along a walkway in a circular route. So yeah, you're just supposed to circle around it, enjoying the grayness of the sand cone. Well, that has been kind of a short overview of some of the most popular Zen art forms, focusing, on Japan mainly. It's been great showing them to you. Here is my bibliography, where I got my sources from and all that, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Have a good one.